Hey, welcome back to MR Fishing Ohio, and today we're going to be talking about a topic I know quite a bit about, and that is, should you stand while kayak fishing? Now, I'm going to make a couple assumptions if you're watching this video. One, you probably have a kayak or like to go kayak fishing, and two, you've probably not stood up much before, and you're kind of curious on really what's the best way to do this. And really it comes down to three things. What kind of kayak do you have? What's the weather like? And then what are you like? And I'll get a little more into detail on that one at the end. So the first factor you're going to want to consider, most importantly, is what's the weather. If the weather is sketchy, it's sketchy for you to stand up. And depending on what part of the country you're in and what kind of body of water you're in, it's probably unsafe to be standing if there's a chance of you falling in, especially in the very cold weather earlier on in the year. And you'll notice in a lot of my videos, you won't see me standing up much in the month of March or even early April. Now, once the water gets above 50 something degrees or 60, there really isn't a major concern about hypothermia or something like that. So if you're a strong swimmer, you fall in, not a big deal. Now, the second factor is what kind of kayak do you have? If you have a sit on top fishing kayak dedicated to that, that's over $1,000, in general, that means it's probably a kayak good enough to stand on. Now, that means nothing if you don't take yourself into account. And what do I mean by that? You are the biggest factor in this. A bigger factor than weather and a bigger factor than the kayak itself is how is your balance? Are you a graceful person or not? If you're someone that's likely to fall over standing up on a flat surface, then you might not want to stand up in a kayak. And here's the thing. As you'll see in my clips, I fish both ways, and I could catch a similar amount of fish whether I was standing or not. But there are advantages to standing, and there's some advantages to sitting, depending on what kind of lure you're using. And you'll see a lot of it is just confidence and feeling like you're not going to fall in. I've only come close to falling in one time, and it was not while I was actually fishing. So it was just a situation where a rogue wave kind of hit me that I wasn't expecting, and I stumbled a little bit, but it wasn't enough to knock me off. While I've been fishing, I've never felt like I almost fell over into the drink because I have a very stable kayak. So if you have a really nice fishing kayak and you're relatively fit and you're not worried about falling over, go ahead and stand up. But if those two things don't fit your situation, you might want to rethink doing so. So I'm going to kick it over to some clips showing fishing, whether I'm sitting or standing, and I'll talk a little bit more about this concept. So let's take a look at that. All right, so in this first instance, I'm standing while fishing on a perfectly flat, calm summer day. Now, this was in a tournament that I ended up doing pretty well in, and for basically the majority of this tournament, I was fishing a wacky rigged Cinco. I Texas rigged it a little bit as well, but weightless, just a hook. And what was beneficial about standing at this place was that I was in deeper water and I could accurately target some different places to cast in between these big patches of weeds. Now, if I was sitting, yes, I could still do that, but the benefit of standing while doing this is that I can make more accurate casts and start from a little bit higher place when I release the lure. And that can be really beneficial for a number of reasons. As you see, I reel this fish in. I'm going to sit down eventually, so that's something you're going to have to get comfortable with if you stand while fishing, is that when you land the fish, and if it's a bigger fish especially, you're going to need to sit down in order to actually land that fish. If it's a smaller one, you could obviously just boat flip it. But in a tournament where you want to measure all the fish, you don't want to take too many chances, especially if you don't have a limit yet. Just a little over 12. Now, in this next instance, a very different situation. This was just after ice out, And as you can see, I am standing in a kayak fishing. Now, what's even more interesting about this video is that this is my first time using this kayak. And you're probably thinking, is that really a great idea? Well, here's the thing. Before I had this kayak, I had another model that was fairly similar, and their stability was just about the same. Now, the only reason why I'm standing here in really cold conditions, because it was pretty cold. And like I said, it's first week of March. Ice had probably only melted a couple days before this. Was that it was just about dead flat calm. And that's really the number one factor to how much I'm going to stand. For me, a lot of times is the conditions. And when it's flat like this, I've never had a time where I've almost fallen in. Now, that's not to say that it can't happen, because it happens to plenty of people. And a lot of times when they say, if you haven't fallen in a kayak, just wait, it's going to happen at some point. So if you're going to be doing standing this time of year, you just got to be really careful and not do anything sudden. Now, the one thing that would not be the end of the day, if I did fall in, it probably would have been extremely cold, and there would be a chance I could develop a hypothermia. I am only a couple feet away from shore here, and the water is less than a couple feet deep. So I would be able to get out and get to my car. It would be absolutely miserable time, but wasn't in danger of death. Now, I would not be doing this if I was out on a big lake this time of year, but where I was at, it wasn't exactly terrible. Now, for the most part, during this time of the year, I'm going to be sitting, especially if I'm on a bigger body of water. Now, in this last clip, I'm sitting, and you haven't really seen that yet, but for this, I am moving around, covering a lot of water. And one of the reasons why I'll sit if I'm wanting to cover a lot of water is that I'm just making casts here and there, and every time I stand up, I'm wasting more time. And in this tournament, the same one from the first clip I showed, it was the most fish you can catch over 12 inches, was combined total inches to win the tournament. So I was doing a lot of moving around, and so I did sit a lot more than I would normally in a given day during a tournament. And because I was fishing soft plastics, a lot of times up really shallow, it was nice to be sitting because I could get under some of the cover you see in front of me a little easier than if I was standing. And so when I was out in the deeper stuff, I would stand, but when I was up hugging the shore really tight, I was sitting down a lot. And so you just have to be able to cast and fish efficiently from either position. And that's really what it comes down to, because if you're too reliant on one over the other, it can really hurt you. I know for myself that there's some times where I can't get bit unless I'm standing. And then there'll be other times where I can't fish unless I'm sitting. So once again, it's one of those things where if you're not comfortable standing, you might go all day and never get a bite, only because you're either not feeling that bite while you're seated, or you're not getting as good of a hook set that you could be getting while you're standing. I find for myself, with a lot of moving baits, I tend to prefer to stand. And if I'm fishing something slow or soft plastics, a lot of times I'll find myself seated when I'm fishing those lures. And then another lure I do sit most of the time I'm using it are crankbaits. And I don't know if it's just because of the action of the rod, but I find that more comfortable. So ultimately, when you take safety out of the way, the thing you really should be focusing on about if you should or shouldn't stand in a kayak is, can you do it, first of all? And if you can, it's got to be a benefit most of the time, because it increases your field of vision, increases your cast distance, and it's just another way to give you an edge while you're on the water. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and see you next time.